Everyone, thanks for the invitation. My name is Mark. I'm in the geography department. I'm a researcher there. Unfortunately, my co-presenter, Brian Barrett from Galway City Council, wasn't able to join today. I'm sure all the best parts of the presentation were done by Brian. And any questions I don't answer properly at the end, Brian could have answered. This presentation is about a collaboration between NUI Galway and Galway City Council about the redevelopment of a historic building in the Nuns Island area of Galway. I'll present the context. I'll present the methodologies that we use to engage various stakeholders about the redevelopment and the results as well. This is a picture of Galway. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from Galway, so I hope I do the city justice. But I do live there and it's my home. It's a city of 80,000 people on the west coast of Ireland. Beautiful city. You can see the River Corrib running through the heart of the city, past the medieval core into Galway Bay. If I draw your attention to the right-hand side of I think I've got that right, the right-hand side of the image, you can see Galway Cathedral, the big cathedral there. In the foreground, you can see the beginnings of the campus of NUI Galway. And in the background is the Nuns Island area of Galway, which is a post-industrial district of the city. Not only does it have a cathedral, it has a functioning convent with enclosed community of nuns living on it, which gives it the name Nuns Island because it's bounded by rivers and has nuns living on it. That's kind of the context. I guess what I should say, I'm going to start big, and then we're just going to narrow down to a particular building on Nuns Island. So Nuns Island has been, it's an eclectic space. So there's a cathedral, there's a convent, there's a secondary school. As we'll see, there's a theatre. So there's creatives working on the site, and there's residents in historic and contemporary buildings as well. But there's also a lot of vacant buildings. It is a post-industrial district. There are old 19th century mills that are not currently in use, but the buildings are there. Some of the buildings are owned by NUI Galway, so there's various plans for the redevelopment and regeneration of Nuns Island, both from the university putting the historic buildings to new uses, and the city council being involved as well. Recently, it's in the process, but it is kind of public, it's in the newspapers, there's been 4.3 million euro from the central government's Urban Regeneration and Development Fund kind of being put towards Nuns Island to kind of create an innovation and creativity district. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's multiple stakeholders here, from school kids to residents to the priest at the cathedral and various other people as well. So the particular building is a building called Manse House or Church House. It's a former Presbyterian pastor's home. There was also a Presbyterian church on the site, which we'll see images of. And there's also funding from the Department of Culture to turn this former manse into a new creative space. Creative Ireland, or the City Council, with the support of Creative Ireland, asked us in the Geography Department to run a public consultation on the future of this building. And so I'm going to take us through kind of that process now. Oh, here's a good visualization as well. This kind of is the area of Nuns Island with certain visions that kind of are there. You can see this is Brian has highlighted creative space there, which is the kind of the name of the space that's being developed in this historic building. And you can kind of see it placed there. So the first thing to point out is I mentioned there's a theatre on Nuns Island. This is the theatre. It's in a former Presbyterian church from the early 19th century. It's a really beautiful building. In the 1980s, Galway City Council took the former church and turned it into a theatre, to turn it into a creative space in the heart of Nuns Island. There was major investment again in 2004. The theatre is managed by Galway Arts Centre, which is one of the main arts organisations in Galway, who are also a kind of key stakeholder in this project as well. And in 2015, Galway City Council purchased the attached property to the former church, or the theatre, which is this building here. So this is the back of the theatre, is actually a house. And you can see what Nuns Island is now. You've got a big river on one side, and you've got smaller rivers and canals there. So that's the building we're talking about, Church House, the manse, creative space. In 2021, Galway City Council secured funding from the central government to refurbish this house into, again, a new creative space for Galway. And also secured funding from Creative Ireland, another government agency, to work with us at the university to do a public consultation involving various stakeholders on the redevelopment of the building. And this year, a design team was appointed to start work on the redevelopment. So what I'm going to go into next is I kind of led the public engagement, the consultation. So I'm going to take us through that process. But at the same time as the consultation's taking place, there are, architects and surveyors, designers looking at the building, seeing what the possibilities are, while we're collecting the view of various stakeholders. My colleagues and I, Patrick Collins and Ulf Strohmeyer, we thought we should have an urban lab in Galway that kind of addresses some of the, urban issues. And there's been a lot of talk about living labs and urban labs in this discussion, and it's something we've been thinking about as well. So it's kind of a nascent institute. It's not formally like it's kind of in the process of becoming something. This is a stand-in logo. There'll be, I think, another logo out soon. But we want it to be a home for research into urban life and the future of Galway, bring together a range of views, expertise, and methods to investigate and prototype responses to contemporary urban issues. We want to do public engagement that is innovative but appropriate to every context as well. So when we did this consultation, it was under the banner of Galway, Urban Lab Galway, and these kind of ideas behind what an urban lab is. So the consultation. There is 3 stages to it. There is interviews, workshops, and surveys. The interviews were the first stage. We did 13 semi-structured interviews with key stakeholders involved in creative space or church house. That would involve interviews with representatives from the City Council, Galway Arts Centre, NUI Galway, Galway Cathedral, the secondary school called the Bish, which is on Nuns Island, and various artists and creatives as well who would be using the space, and youth workers as well. So when we did the interviews, we wanted to keep it kind of as open as possible. As I think Femke said in the previous presentation, something like an urban lab approach is not coming at it with necessarily specific research questions, but listening to people, and then the questions come out of that. So when we were doing the interviews, we did ask, what do you need and what do you want? So the role and function of church house or creative space was important. But we also got feedback during the interview saying, okay, what happens there is one thing, but it's the values and practices that happen in the building once it's up and running that are crucial as well. So we need to start asking about the values and practices as well. And I've just noticed a terrible grammatical error there, but it's placed within the existing and future cultural landscape of Galway. So creative space isn't the only creative space in Galway, it's a node in a network of spaces. So how does it fit into that other network? What can be done in creative space, but what can be done elsewhere as well, and how do they fit together? So we did those interviews, and then we did workshops. I'm actually gonna go to the next slide for this. So we did 5 workshops. Now, 2 of the workshops were getting people from the interviews, some of the people from the interviews, to sit around. Well, it was on Zoom, Omicron was happening, so everything went online again. And we had Zoom meetings, again, like going through the questions, looking at how you would place the functions in Church House, what values and practices you would like to see there. So we did that with the stakeholders. Then we invited community groups and artistic groups that had been kind of adversely affected by the pandemic, who didn't have spaces anymore, and what they needed from the city, from the space. And those were online. Then we did 2 workshops with students, secondary school students from the Bish School. So that's the middle slide there. So got guys who were like 13, 14 years old. And basically the workshop, I took them on walks around Nuns Island to look at the architecture, talk about the space, the history, the mixture of the ecological and the built environment, what it's like to be a student on Nuns Island, and then to look at Church House and say, what do you want with that place, knowing that it's going to be a creative space, and gave them surveys to fill out. So that was the work with the school. I did a similar thing with the MA students in Environment, Society and Development. I took them on a walk through Nuns Island. We discussed lots of things along the way, those same issues, and then came back and filled in a survey as well. And then once these workshops had taken place, which were informed by the interviews, we then created a survey, a public survey, that was informed by the interviews and the workshops. That went public. We did some on-street surveys using the iPad, stopping people on the street, but mainly it was online through social media platforms that we started, the Urban Lab Galway, Twitter and Facebook and all of that, and we got about 287 responses. I should say, we did a survey for the residents of Nuns Island, a bespoke survey for them as well that was handed out through the Nuns Island Residents Association. So we brought in all these kind of different stakeholders from someone from the Galway Arts Centre and Galway City Council to kids who go to school in the area, MA students, and just the wider public as well. So what was part of the workshops and the surveys and the interviews was looking at the current floor plan of Church House. So this is what it looks like inside right now. It's kind of saying, what would you like to happen on the ground floor or the top floor? And through the process, we came out with some kind of definitive functions, which is there's a real need for rehearsal space in Galway. Musicians, theatre performers, actors need a space to produce work, not to show it. There's places to exhibit work in Galway. There's not spaces to test out stuff, to produce stuff, to create your artwork, whether that's like dance or painting or jamming with your band. So that was important. So it's rehearsal space, studio space, a meeting space where different community groups can come in and meet, or people from the public can come in if there's a cafe. So there's activity and buzz around the space as well. And a youth space, so it's kind of open to everyone. And then the people are saying on the top floor, there's also a lack of kind of admin and office space. So groups could use those types of, the top floor could be, a rotating office space. There could be administrative support. If you're an artist, then you have administrators who can help you, take your work forward in Galway. And meeting and recording space as well. Then we looked at also on the right there, the values and practices. This is a word cloud from, it's either the survey or one of the workshops, but people wanted it to be a collaborative space, a multifunctional space, inspiring space, that's community focused. The word joyful is there, and nurturing. So these are the values that people wanted when we asked, what values, what practices should be in place. This is what the feedback was saying. And then we said, in one of the workshops, it said, or a couple of the workshops, I asked, in a few years' time after a creative space opens, how would you like to be describing it? So imagine that you're in the future and you're describing creative space to someone, and people, the responses were that it's sustainable, it's open, it's diverse, it's welcoming. That's how we'd like to be describing this space. So the results of the consultation, which were then fed back to the City Council, Creative Ireland and the university, are kind of summarized in these key themes. So we've gone through this process of interviews, workshops, surveys, a range of different people involved in that, and you kind of have to thematize them, I guess. So this is what it was. The first one was flexibility. People wanted a flexible space where a range of artistic practices could take place. So architecturally, that meant people were suggesting as much as possible, the ground floor walls could be knocked out. Now that's up for the designers and architects to decide what's feasible, but the more open the space, the more activities could take place. So you could have, a band rehearsing in the morning, a dance rehearsal in the afternoon, and a talk where the public come in at the nighttime. So used for these variety of uses, and as much as possible for a variety of art forms. Accessibility was also key. That it should be designed with universal access in mind, so people with diverse mobilities are able to access and use the space. It should also be operated through the principles of open access, so that anyone can kind of book spaces. I'm not suggesting this is how it will happen, but say if you are like giving space to professional artists to develop their work, there will always be the ability for community groups, youth groups, others to also book and use the space as well. That was really crucial there. And then creative process. So that was how creative space would fit in as a node in creative space in Galway. So it's not, say, an exhibition space, it's not a performance space, but it is a productive space, it's a rehearsal space, a studio space, where people develop and experiment their work. So as part of the creative process, then it becomes a center where artists, young people, can then be connected up to other spaces in Galway where you can showcase your work, where you can perform your work. And this is what we meant by creative process at the end. So just to summarize, this was an example of consultation done, a very specific consultation done on a very specific building in Galway, but it was a collaboration between the university through Urban Lab Galway and the City Council to kind of produce some, public engagement methods. I think it's important to say that these aren't kind of statutory processes, but what they are is engaging people at the initial stage of the design and development. So when you do start this kind of more statutory processes, you already have people on board with it because you've listened to them, yeah. Thank you. That's my last slide. Thanks.